Hi guys, I'd like to welcome you guys all back to my channel. Please enjoy this Quarantine Pages interview with Tochi Onyebuchi.
For those who don't know me, I'm Brittany. My YouTube channel is Melanin Eclectic. I'm a huge fantasy sci-fi reader, and thanks to Jerry, I'm also heavily into Black speculative. So obviously, it is my honor to introduce the amazing Tochi Onyebuchi, who his first book I read was Beast Made of Night, Duology. And then the second book that I became thoroughly obsessed with him at that point was War Girls. And then the next book that's still pulling on my heartstrings right now is his adult debut, which was Riot Baby. So we're very glad that you're here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come talk to us.
Oh, it is my pleasure. A pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, it's just like, I can't believe you're here. But so I'm just going to ask you questions that I have been dying to ask you as far as your books are concerned, because I want other people to be as obsessed with your books as I am. So I'm just going to start with the very first one. I'm going to hold it up so we can. For War Girls, why did you choose to write about girls for the Biafran War instead of boys?
So a big part of the genesis for War Girls was actually my mother. I remember it was maybe the beginning of 2015 or 2016. Some random like car ride. Our family was leaving the house of some family friends, and mom had just randomly started talking about one time when she was a kid and there was a civil war going on, and she and her family had to like live in the forest for a little bit as they were on the run. And like if you're like a first generation kid and you randomly hear these stories from your parents about like wild stuff that happened in the old country, you're like, wait a second, pause, hold on, let's bring that back. And so that was the first time that it really occurred to me that so much of the stuff that I'd studied in college as a political science major had like actually happened to my family. And that prompted me to dig deeper and to get more stories and to do research into the Biafran conflict. So that's a big part of it. It was inspired mostly by my mom, but also I wanted to write about these two young women, in part because so many stories that I read, particularly stories in speculative fiction that deal with the issue of war, are always dealing with boys and men. And it's, as though war is this intrinsically masculine thing. And I wanted to write something that I hadn't seen before or hadn't seen very much of before. I wanted to have, a Gundam story with young women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ooh, but this is like a super nerd question. So the bots that they fought with, was this like a Megazord inspiration? Because I feel like it was a Megazord inspired.
So I am a huge like mech anime fan. Everything from freaking Voltron to Evangelion. Which, oh man, can you even call Evangelion a mech anime?
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, you can.
Just like emphatically, yes. But at the core of my mech fandom is an abiding love of Gundam. Like Gundam Wing, when I first saw it in that monumental Toonami block on Cartoon Network. Shouts out to Toonami. That made a huge impression on me, like as a kid and as a storyteller. And like that, I wanted to write a giant robot story for the longest time.
I'm here for this. It was either going to be Gundam or Megazords. I was like, I know it's something older. I know it's got to be like an old school reference. I get it, but all right, I'm satisfied. Gundam is good. Okay, so you mentioned earlier, and I guess I never paid attention to it, but you were a lawyer before you started writing books, and then you just came out with Beast Made of Night because being a lawyer was too easy for you?
This would be the most Nigerian thing ever. No, so I'd known that I wanted to write ever since I was a kid, and it was only a little bit after that 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 the idea of becoming a writer like was something that occurred to me, because I didn't know that you could like do it as a job or as a profession until I was maybe like in my late teens or what have you. But also growing up in a Nigerian household, your career options are rather limited. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, and then disgrace to the family. So I figured I'd split the difference by going to law school while writing. And I knew that I could write around whatever other thing I was doing, right? Whether it was an academic obligation or whether it was another job, I would always be able to write. Um, and while I was in law school, that was actually when I started getting involved in a lot of civil rights and social justice work. And that was pivotal for me because that put me on the track to learn about and immerse myself in issues such as mass incarceration. And we'll probably talk about this more when we get to Riot Baby, but a lot of the stuff, or at least a lot of the themes that infuse my work, particularly even Beast Made of Night, arose out of concerns that I got introduced to while in law school. And another funny thing too, my first editor for Beast Made of Night was somebody who I met in law school, just randomly at a party that one of my really, really good friends, a classmate, was throwing. Her college roommate was there, and her college roommate happened to be a YA editor. And I was like, well, there you go. If I hadn't gone to law school, I might not be published right now. Yeah, so it's one of those things where everything that I learned and went through while in law school and sort of during my legal career afterwards has played a role in my writing in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. Was it hard for you to, I guess, step out of the normal and become solely a writer as opposed to writing on the side and doing what your parents wanted for you to do?
So I'd been writing sort of on the side for like the majority of my life. And the thing that allowed me to feel comfortable making the jump into full-time writing was that I was after I left the law, I went into tech for a little bit, in part because it had a much more forgiving schedule and work-life balance. And as my writing career was starting to take off, and I would need to do things like tour and what have you. It became increasingly evident that that was not going to be reconcilable with a legal career where you would have like court dates that were non-negotiable. um, and so I was at a tech company for a couple of years, and it was cool. It was a immensely emotionally draining job, but it was cool. It had benefits, and I told myself that because it had gotten to the point where I had a couple books out at that point. So I was still like working full time, as Beast Made of Night and Crown of Thunder had come out, and in the sort of lead up to War Girls. And I told myself that between writing, editing, touring, and the day job, I could do two out of those three things really, really, really well. When it came time to do all three of them simultaneously, that's when stuff started to get a little shaky. So I told myself, I would, I'd been putting money away, and I said, okay, let me give myself enough of a financial cushion such that if I don't make a dime off of my writing for a year, I'll still be straight. And if, I have a bad year or whatever, I'll go back into doing whatever day job that, I can use one of my 50 million degrees for, right? And so in March of 2019, I left my job to go full time to be a full time writer. And so that I think was part of what made the transition easier for me was I felt comfortable with the financial cushion I had. It also helped that I at that point had known at least of the existence of many other Nigerian writers. So it didn't seem like I was doing this like bold and experimental thing. I knew Nigerian writers who had been doctors and who had been lawyers, and so that was really, really helpful to me, at least on an emotional level and a sort of cognitive level. Reconciling what I wanted to do with my reality.
Okay. Okay. We're just gonna jump right into Riot Baby, though. I mean, clear, I love Beast Made of Night. I love that it was a fantasy that focused around a Black man, and the Black man wasn't weak. He was considered powerful, even in his position that was considered lower than him. But I could go on that forever, but we got to talk about Riot Baby. I mean, you gave us 150 pages, and I just felt like it wasn't enough. um, I felt like I'm going back and rereading the ending again, but we do have some questions focused specifically on Riot Baby. So to start, it was your first adult debut. And Jerry also wants to know, your writing style in Riot Baby was very different from your writing style in War Girls. Were you trying to write a different kind of story? What was your goal?
So it's interesting. Before Beast Made of Night, all I'd written was adult fiction. So Beast Made of Night was like my first like YA effort, and I've always felt more comfortable in adult, given that like I just have more practice with it. But the way that I conceive of it in my mind, it's sort of like YA is playing basketball, where the goal is to put the ball in the basket, right? And you can do it in various ways. You can dunk, you can drive to the rim and dunk. You could, you have a mid-range jumper. You can shoot from the free throw line. You have the three-pointer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And you can do like somewhat flashy things too. But essentially, like your goal is to get points. And writing adult for me is like competing in the Summer X Games, right? Where the goal is to do the most like stylistically daring thing possible, to do the most like physics defying trick in the book, right? Uh, and that, so they use in some ways different muscles, although they overlap a little bit. But that's very much how it feels to me. I feel like there are things that I'm forced to focus on in my YA writing that definitely make me a better writer. Issues of clarity and plot beats and character development and all of that. And then there are certain things with my adult writing, particularly with regards to language and prose level stuff that I feel like I'm able to exercise and work on and get better at as a writer. So yeah, it's there. I everything that I write feels intense. I think that's just like my brand. um, but it's cool to be able to exercise those different muscles as a writer.
Okay. Um, Wait, I have one more question specifically for Riot Baby. So Ella is my favorite character, obviously, but my question specifically for Ella is, who is Ella in your mind? Who does she represent in the real world?
Mm. That like there are so many people who inspired her, many of whom actually are my like social justice inclined colleagues from law school. So when I graduated, there were I think about just over I want to say 400 students in my class, and out of 400 plus students, the number of them who were going on to be public defenders was two,
Hmm.
and they were both Black women. And so that I think was a big part of the impetus behind the character of Ella. And also they were like the most gangster militant, like social justice, like they were about it. Like it was so inspiring to just like be around them. So I think they were a big sort of source of inspiration for Ella, particularly with regards to their anger, right? Because that was, I think, an aspect that I hadn't necessarily seen before, was this righteous anger that was absolutely justified and being channeled into a very specific outlet. And I think seeing that in person really helped me solidify the character of Ella. She's also just got a bit of me in there. Um, But yeah, I would say she's mostly inspired by my my classmates.
Hmm. Black women inspire everything. Okay. The next question that was asked, it was by Noria. She wants to know, what have you learned about yourself by writing Riot Baby?
Whew. Oh my goodness.
That's question.
I learned I don't know how to write a not intense book. Um, no, what did I learn about myself? Um, it's interesting. I don't think I realized how angry I was until I wrote Riot Baby. I think that was like the most instructive part of it. Um, in part because like before that book sort of came out of me, it like the anger at injustice had been this sort of amorphous thing, and I didn't really know the shape of it, right, or the extent of it. It was just this sort of, particularly at the moment when this book started to come to life, which was like 2014, 2015 or so, when there was this huge spate of, videographic evidence of these police involved killings, right? And it was just over and over and over and over and over again. And each time you're being sort of re-traumatized. Every single instance where this footage is released, whether it's the dash cam footage of Laquan McDonald or Philando Castile or like what have you. And I just remember feeling like just defeated and devastated. And then as soon as all of that had an outlet in this story, I was like, wait a second, I'm really angry. And so I think that was part of it. But I also think another, the flip side of that was that I realized um, how much writing can be used as, a method of catharsis. Uh, it's sort of like this alchemy is happening where, I have this stuff that's happening inside me, and then through the process of writing, I can turn it into something that's meaningful. Shout out to Caleb. Caleb called it cathartic. But I can turn it into something meaningful and something that resonates with a lot of other people. Because I think one thing that I felt during the time of Riot Baby's genesis was this huge sense of aloneness, right? And one of the things that writing Riot Baby and seeing it out in the world has done has been sort of convince me that like alone is the last thing that I am, right? Like there are so many people out there that are feeling the exact same thing and have felt the exact same thing and see themselves seen in this particular book. That was a good question.
Yeah, Noria. I can't even take credit for that. So I just want to remind people, you can write questions.
There is a question that Isis has asked for Tochi. And going back to the basketball reference that you were making, is making the basket completing the book or conveying a particular lesson or reaching a particular audience?
So for me, making the basket is like hitting certain beats, right? Whether it's with regards to, particular character arc or particular like character trope. So if you're doing like, enemies to lovers or something like that, there are like particular beats that you have to hit to make that, like also make it convincing and unique, but also like, you know, engage in the mechanism for payoff for the reader, because like every book is in one way, shape, or form a contract with the reader. Like, here's this thing that you're getting, right? And particularly, it's part of why you don't necessarily pick up a romance novel expecting a thriller plot and vice versa, right? And so I feel like with YA, and this isn't to say that like YA is formulaic or anything like that, or to even use the term formulaic in a derogatory sense. It's only to say that I feel like I'm focused. YA is interesting in that it focuses me a lot more on the mechanics of storytelling than Adult would be where I feel like I can be more amorphous, or amorphous to the point of excess sometimes, and my editor has to rein me back in. But I think it's that sort of thing where there are certain mechanical aspects of a YA novel with regards to world building or character arcs or plot beats in particular, and making the basket is like hitting those elements.
Okay.
As people generate their questions in the chat, I wanted to know if I could ask 2 particular questions, if you don't mind.
Hit me.
The first question is in regards to Riot Baby. And obviously Riot Baby is better than anything H.G. Wells, Isaac Asimov, even Rod Serling has ever written. But those men were very well known for creating dystopian and science fiction stories that kind of foretold, kind of warned society of what would happen if we didn't change our ways. And I think that kind of that was a really specific period in sci-fi that has kind of immortalized those writers, right? And I was kind of wondering, because while reading Riot Baby, I had this eerie feeling that this book was designed to prognosticate what the reality is going to be for Black bodies in the future if America doesn't change its ways, in terms of the prison industrial complex, in terms of the kind of like normalization of public surveillance and who gets surveilled and who doesn't. So that's my question.
Yeah, no, there's a portion of Riot Baby that takes place in the near future, but one of the most fascinating aspects of the conversation that is attended the publication of this book is that a lot of the aspects of it that people are referring to as dystopian and sort of implying that there's some sort of like future imagining, they're happening right now. So much of like there's a character who leaves jail and has a chip implanted in him as a sort of monitoring. That's essentially like an ankle monitor, right? Like it's like that sort of thing is already happening. A lot of the stuff with regards to drone surveillance, so much of that's I didn't have to exercise my imagination at all for a lot of that stuff. But at the same time, for a lot of readers, that is a completely foreign reality, right? It's completely alien, and I think alien is like the word of choice here, alien to their experience. And so I think that's one of the things that I wanted to get at with Riot Baby was, show this reality that's very much happening in this country, but that, to a certain reader can be like, wow, this has got to be science fiction. And in reality, no, it's people's real lives. And so, when the term dystopian gets used, you have to ask yourself, dystopian for whom, right? And I think every science fiction story is about the now. So it's interesting thinking about science fiction as this genre that's uniquely equipped to comment on the future, or like, and also too, you see it a lot in Black Mirror, for instance, which is part of why like Black Mirror is so like horrifying, is because the futures that it imagines are so convincing. But they're all about now, right? Like what's going on now, the type of society that we are now, where we're positioning ourselves now. And so I think what's really, really successful speculative fiction, and you see this particularly with Octavia Butler, is writing to the particular moment. So even though a story may be set in the future, it's really just about the now.
That is very, okay, yes, that helps me so much with my kind of like, because it's interesting because as a Black person, even when you're aware and I think that it's very easy to sometimes to think, well, I'm not at risk, or you build these walls inside of your brain to kind of prevent you from seeing how, like, actually though, this is happening right now. You know what I mean? Even if you logically do know it's happening. So I really, really appreciate that commentary. And the second question is much more light. I wanted to ask you, as a geek and somebody who's really into fandoms and gamings and who is also Black, how do you create safe spaces for yourself? How do you handle and navigate prejudice online? And what advice do you have, most importantly, what advice do you have for Black folks who want to be in these spaces but are scared?
No, definitely. I mean, that's such a good question. And it's interesting too, because like when I was coming up, you know, anime just wasn't the big thing, right? Like there was this really devoted fandom, and you know, if you were a Toonami head, you were a Toonami head. But you know, if people found out that you liked anime, you weren't getting, you know, the type of shine that you would get if you were like on the basketball team. But then you look at it now, and like people are asking Michael B. Jordan what his favorite anime is. Like, you know, I made like Inuyasha's coming back, and I made a joke about the one time that Lady Gaga had on this outfit that it was this like red like jumper type thing, and she had this massive white hair, and I was like, Inuyasha coming back, and people thought that was hilarious. So like, you know, you have rappers that are talking about Attack on Titan, and you like it's so pervasive now, and I think that's really cool. You know, you go to Comic-Con, see all these Black cosplayers, and it's magical. It's absolutely magical. I think it's interesting because I feel like from what I've witnessed, there, you know, if you are enthusiastic about a thing, like and in a sort of genuine way, there are people that will respond to that. At the same time, though, like one thing that I've noticed is that like I have a lot of friends that are involved in Star Wars fandom, you know, at varying levels, whether it's, you know, just as you know, people who watch the movies, or if it's people who've written tie-in books. And it's it's fascinating to watch the backlash happen to them, particularly because they're generally the type of people that are trying to make the Star Wars canon more inclusive, right? And that is like, I noticed that a lot more there than, say, for instance, if you like jumped on Twitter and asserted that Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z was Black, nobody would debate you. Everybody would be like, yeah, no, he's definitely Black. So I think, so I like, I don't know if I have um advice. I think part of it is just sort of seeing where you feel comfortable. But I think another part of it is being unashamed of the things that you love, right? I think ultimately that's what it boils down to. There's an entire generation of content creators that were raised on Toonami. Like if you read Steel Crow Saga by Paul Kruger, that book is essentially Full Metal Pokemon.
Yeah.
Like that it's the most anime book ever. And it's like, it's amazing because you will have people writing books inspired by Sailor Moon. You will have people writing books inspired by Evangelion. And it's like, it's really, really, really cool to see them really wear their passions on their sleeve. And I think, at least for me personally, seeing that out in the world is a really cool thing for me. Even if it's like something that I haven't seen or experienced, or something that I'm generally not excited about, I like seeing people be excited about a thing that they love. So I think if you can guard that, like however you need to, that's the most important part.
Okay. Nerd life. Okay, wait. I have a question from Nikita. She says, are you open to receiving communication from emerging writers who want to connect with you? If so, what's the best way to do that?
So the best way to do that, I have a contact form on my website, tochionyebuchi.com. That's like the best like official way to reach me. I think in terms of, you know, I'm also very active on Twitter too, and like I generally like, especially if there's a particular like controversy, I generally like steer away from book Twitter controversies, except to like fire off a couple joke tweets and then I'm out. um, But like I like being able to help and inspire confidence in younger writers, because like I remember being there, and it's such a unique and weird place to be in. And if you can find somebody that you can relate to or that can speak to that experience, it's really powerful.
Okay. Next, let me see. Raja, I hope I said your name right. Um, her question or their question is Riot Baby is short fiction and you've previously published novels. What's the difference in your process for approaching writing a short story relative to a novel?
Whew. Oh man, it's funny. So novels involve a lot more planning, at least from my end, even though I'm a sort of hybrid planner and pantser. But with short stories, I will have an idea that will sit in my head for a while, and it'll sort of grow a character or characters, and it'll grow a setting, and it'll grow like thematic preoccupations and whatnot, and then I'll like write the whole thing out. Whereas with novels, I generally, put together an outline of the overall plot, and then maybe break down the first couple of chapters by scene. And by then, I already have who my main characters are. I already have the setting. I've done a lot of the world building. Um, it's interesting with Riot Baby because it exists in between those two forms. Um, it was attended by a lot of the same processes on either side. So there was a lot of just like straight like writing what I felt. But it was also sort of attended by this schema that I had in my head of what I wanted the book to look like and where I wanted it to go. So yeah, but at the same time too, every project is different, and I haven't yet like free written an entire novel, but I think that'd be a really interesting challenge, and also it would be the most like stressful thing ever.
Yeah, that sounds really intense. Jen wants to know, what are you reading now? Even though we heard you peek that earlier. And what was the last book that you read that really made you geek out?
Yo, okay, so I'm reading The Color of Law now, and then actually I'm really excited to get to Pachinko by Minjin Lee. Shout out to Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Um, I am also okay. So the last book I read and so this is a book that I'm still thinking about, and I think I read it like early last year, or maybe even the year before. But Freshwater by Akweke Emezi, like, yo, that book, what in the entire world? How did they do that? Like, I okay, let me try to like formulate. I've never read a book like that in my entire life. Like, I've read a lot of books, and I've read a lot of out there books, and I've read a lot of like weird and dynamic and innovative books. I've never read a book like Freshwater before. It was a wholly unique experience. There's one passage on page 37. I still remember the page. Still. Like, what on earth? So like that is wild to me. Also, they're just such a luminous being and so incredible and it's inspiring to be around and like all of that. So like that's definitely an added bonus. But yeah, that book. It was one of those books where you read it and you're like, I did not know this could be done with the English language. It's stunning. I just and it's like I'm not even jealous.
Mm.
Like I'm not even like, oh, I wish I'd written that. I'm just so happy that that book exists and it's out in the world. But yeah, that I think is the most recent book that I've geeked out about. Yeah.
I mean, if you haven't read it, if you didn't feel like you should read it now, I feel like you probably should. Actually, we're kind of rounding up to the point of the hour where the most important question is, so So, what you writing? When's Rebel Sisters coming out? Do we hear any, sneaks on that?
So Rebel Sisters is coming out this fall. It's got an October pub date. I actually just recently, I think it was last week or the week before, handed in the first round of copy edits. So like it is happening. It is like happening. Yo, I am so proud of this book. It's yes. It's like I love it. I love it. I'm really like happy with it. And I'm really excited to see what y'all think about it, because it's like one of the things that I've been really happy that I've been able to do with this series is, use these young women as a vehicle for exploring a lot of political and societal issues that are important to me. So, in War Girls, there was this exploration not only of warfare and the role of young people being sort of manipulated in it, but also issues of prejudice and the violence that can attend that, and also this idea of brainwashing and being completely convinced that the person who belongs to the group that's other is completely deserving of your hatred, right? Like there's so many things that I wanted to deal with, particularly with issues of terrorism and whatnot. And War Girls, Rebel Sisters is very much caught up with the question of what happens after, right? Like how do you rebuild after that? Like not just how do you rebuild a nation, but how do you rebuild yourself? Do you shut the door on your past completely and try to construct this new identity and this new self, and just like and put the trauma of your past behind you? What if that trauma refuses to go back to the past? What if it refuses to stay in its lockbox? What are the different ways in which it can rear its head and force you to confront it? What are some of the ways in which it sort of boxes in your life, like prospects and possibilities? And so that is, I think, something that I've been thinking a lot about. But also, too, Rebel Sisters deals a lot with the refugee crisis. And so there are a lot of allusions, particularly to the European refugee crisis that reached its peak in 2015. That consisted a lot of refugees fleeing the Syrian civil war. And so there are issues of assimilation, and how do you try to be yourself in this host society, right? That can be varying degrees of hostile to you, right? Like there could be the outright racial or religious hostility, or there could be like the microaggressions, series of microaggressions in all these different avenues, whether it's school, whether it's in public transit, on the way to work, or just wherever. And so like that, I'm really like it's yeah it's yeah.
You don't understand. I've been waiting to ask you that question since I read War Girls. Like, is there more? I didn't know that there was going to be a book, or I didn't know that the book had a sequel until you told us on Twitter. Mm. And then when you told us on Twitter, we were like, "Thank God!"
Yeah, no, I can be pretty cruel with my books. I'm not that cruel.
We appreciate that. Thank you so much. Is there any other books you would like to give us a hint about?
So I guess I can say this because like the deal's been announced now. But my next adult novel is titled Goliath, and it is about a group of Black and brown brick stackers in a post-apocalyptic New Haven, Connecticut, who have to deal with gentrifiers from space.
What? Wait.
I can't breathe. 911.
gentrifiers from space?
Yes.
Okay, I heard it correctly the first time. Wow. That took me completely by surprise. Wow. Okay, I'm ready. Wait, can I put that on my Goodreads TBR already? Like,
it's coming. It's coming. I actually just yesterday had a call with my editor. Shout out to Roshi. She also edited me for Riot Baby, so we got that heat coming. Just had a call with her yesterday about the book and everything, and it's going to be fire. Like, I'm so excited for y'all to eventually read this book.
I'm so ready for this. Okay. So thank you for that. That just made like my whole day. The description just kept getting better and better, and it inspires, so I'm set. Well, actually, we have a ton. Good. Yeah, we have a lot of questions and statements, and
I was in particularly really interested in the question about how Nigerians responded to War Girls, and who asked that? I'm sorry, that was
the question I was looking for, because I wasn't expecting.
It was Sada or Sarah?
Yes,
who asked.
So it's interesting. I was expecting a lot of pushback, particularly because Nigerians can get very territorial with the telling of their stories. And so there's that aspect, but also too, the Biafran War is just not really talked about in Nigeria. It's kind of like verboten. It's not taught in schools. It's not really after the war, there was this whole policy of no victor, no victim. And the idea was that, look, we're just going to move forward. We're not going to talk about this. We're not going to address, any of the underlying, tribal tensions or what have you. We're just going to rebuild and keep it moving. And the idea was, it was this sort of unofficial policy of silence that has sort of endured. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a book that's inspired by literally the most traumatic thing that's happened to this nation ever, right? And so I was expecting to have to, I was expecting to have to knuckle up, I was expecting to have to deal with some haters. But the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think in part because a lot of my generation of Nigerian and Nigerian American, especially if they've grown up in the States, they're used to not hearing about it, especially from their parents or grandparents who lived through it and who just refused to talk about it. So to see, a story inspired by that start to come to light has renewed in them a desire to learn more about it and to study it and to be more insistent in their questions and in their sort of desire to know more. So that's actually been a very pleasant surprise. It's been a lot of Nigerians and a lot of young Nigerians and young Nigerian Americans being like, "Yo, I'm so happy that you wrote about this." So yeah, so I was able to breathe a sigh of relief.
That's good. Okay. Joseph says, as a writer, who was your inspiration growing up? I know you mentioned mech anime as a big influence, but what writers serve as inspiration for you?
So probably the person who's been most influential in my career as a writer and storyteller is actually Alexandre Dumas. So in high school, The Count of Monte Cristo was my favorite book of all time, and still is. I think it's got everything that I love, everything that I love in a story, and it's so epic, right? And so in high school, I did a term abroad in France. So I got to spend, it was 2 months, and then 6 weeks of those 2 months we spent in Paris in a homestay. And I and my roommate, we decided to make this day trip out to the Monte Cristo estate, which is right outside of Paris, because I was fanboying for Alexandre Dumas so hard. So we get there, and it's just a quick day trip. It's just me and him, just traveling. And we're walking through the house, and I'm seeing all these portraits on the wall of this black dude. And I'm like, oh, please tell me this dude didn't have like a slave or anything like that. Like, I really, and then I started reading the captions of the pic, like, that was him.
Yep.
I had no idea that Alexandre Dumas was black. Like, no idea. It was mind blowing. It was like one of those like paradigm shifting events that happen like every so often in your life that completely recast everything. It's like, oh my goodness, this changes everything. And like that was the moment for me. So it was like the dude who wrote the Three Musketeers was black. Like arguably the most famous French writer of all time. No shade to Victor Hugo, but arguably the most famous French writer of all time was the same color as me. And like that was just like I could not believe it. And one of the reasons why that was so pivotal for me was because in high school, a lot of what we read with regards to African and African American authors was with regards to the American experience, right? And like those books, I have a much greater appreciation for them now. You know, books like Their Eyes Were Watching God, Invisible Man, like they're extraordinary books. They're tremendous books. But at that age, I wanted to read about, swashbuckling adventures. I wanted to read about like hidden identities. I wanted to read about buried treasure and all this other stuff. And nobody who looked like me was, I wasn't seeing anybody who looked like me writing those stories. And so Alexandre Dumas was like that dude. He was writing the stories that I wanted to read and that I then wanted to write. And it was like permission because it felt like, okay, I don't necessarily have to be writing about, the Black American experience. I can write stories that are inspired by like, I can write stories that have these far-flung romances in them, right? Like and also too, his dad has the most fascinating life story ever. Like, I highly recommend reading the book The Black Count by Alex Reese, I believe. The last name is Reiss, I believe. And it tells the story of Alexandre Dumas's dad. And his life story was so wild that a part of it actually served as the inspiration for the Count of Monte Cristo. Like, it's wild. So he like essentially became one of the highest ranking generals in the French army. And during the campaign in Egypt, like Napoleon was jealous of him because he got to Egypt and the Egyptians thought that he was Napoleon. Yo, what a flex.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say to answer that question, Alexandre Dumas has been probably the most influential writer for me.
I just learned something new today again. So we're about out of time. So there's just one question that just has to be asked because, of who we are. Do you watch BookTube?
I peek at it. I like, here's the thing. I generally try to not like isolate myself, but understand that reviewer communities and like book discussion communities, like I'm not the audience for those, right? Necessarily. Those are readers talking to readers, right? And so it's not necessarily my place to like jump in or insert myself in their conversations, particularly because like, if you read something that I've written and you don't have the most sterling opinion of it, you're like, this is like low-key trash, or like I'm not really feeling it, or whatever. It gets really awkward if I'm part of that conversation, right?
Yeah.
And like I can take criticism, but like still, like I don't want to have to take criticism. But that's so there's that. But at the same time, I do find it particularly heartening when I do come across videos of booktubers of color and booktubers from marginalized backgrounds, like, because that, I think one of the biggest joys in my life is being able to talk about books. I love being able to talk about books. And I love being able to talk about books with people who love being able to talk about books as much as I do. And that's very much what I see in the booktuber community, is that sort of infectious joy. And so when I see that like that, it's just really, really, really inspiring. And it also sort of fuels me to like tell the stories that I want to tell, because like if I can get somebody excited about a book because I like wrote it, like that's so powerful. That's really, really, really powerful to me.
Cool. Okay. Well, we just want to thank you so much for being the first author to grace us with your presence.
Oh no, thank you for having me. That like I was so honored to get the invitation.
I hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Tochi Onyebuchi. It was such an amazing opportunity to sit and chat with him. Shout out to Jesse from Bow Ties and Books for being an amazing co-host and holding it down with the questions. Don't forget, you can go to Noria Reads to check out the Quarantine Pages interview with Alyssa Cole. If you're looking for some more romance in your life, Oshale will be interviewing Christina C. Jones on May 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget, you got to register for this event. And surprise, the author of Cemetery Boys, Aiden Thomas themselves, will be gracing us on Wednesday, May 20th, with Adriana hosting and leading the way. Don't forget, you guys have to register online. Check out our Twitter, our Instagram if you want to be a part of these fun events. And thank you guys so much. Bye.